Food is Medicine, a three-part community series focused on living well and preventing type 2 diabetes through healthy nutrition, physical activity, and emotional well-being. Thank you for joining us tonight for part one of the series focused on nutrition and how healthy eating and good nutrition can support good health. My name is Emily York. I'm a clinical psychologist and project manager at Legacy Health. This event tonight was made possible through the support of Comagine Health, Legacy Health, Basics Market, and a generous donation from Dr. R.D. Hole, a past endocrinologist at Legacy Health. I also need to acknowledge the support by the cooperative agreement funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention or the Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide, please. Before we get going, I'd like to talk about some housekeeping items to make sure you have the best experience possible. You can listen to this webinar on your computer audio, or you can call in with your phone. We suggest using your computer audio or a headset if you have that available for the best audio experience. At the bottom of your screen, you should see three different buttons. On the far left, there's an audio preferences button, and in the middle, you should see a Q&A button. If you click on the audio preferences button, the preferences will pop up for this webinar. You can check on your mic and your speaker volume. We also suggest that you turn the volume up pretty high so that you're able to best hear our speakers. During the presentation, all attendees' mics will be muted. After the presentations are over, there'll be a live Q&A session towards the end. But feel free to submit your questions at any point during the webinar. We're actually really lucky tonight to not only have an expert speaker who's a dietitian, but also to have two other dietitians behind the scenes who will be answering your questions via chat. Tonight we have Kelly Lashkowitz and Laura Schaefer. We're very grateful for them to be here. Now there's a lot of people that have joined us tonight, and for that we're truly grateful. However, I think there's going to be a lot of great questions too. So we're going to do our best to answer those questions via the Q&A box, and we'll also answer some at the end in the live Q&A portion. And it may be that we need to respond to some questions in a follow-up email after the event. To ask a question, click on the Q&A button and a window will appear. Have a look and see if there's other questions that are similar to yours. If there are questions that are similar to the ones that you want to ask, you can just vote on it and give it a thumbs up. If there's another question that you want to ask, feel free to type that in the box. But the ones with the most thumbs up, the most votes, will be prioritized at the top, and we'll make sure to get to the most popular questions first. Today's webinar will be recorded. The links for the webinar will be available on the Legacy Health Diabetes Prevention Program website and Basics Market YouTube page. We'll also be sending out the link via email after the event. Now that we've covered all the housekeeping items, I'd like to share more about our event. Or actually, I should also say, if you have any technical issues, feel free to use that Q&A box to connect with some of our moderators and they can help you. Now back to the event. Did you know that 1 in 3 adults in the US has prediabetes and 9 out of 10 don't know that they have it? The goal of the three-part series is to increase awareness around prediabetes and learn some realistic steps that you can take to reduce your risk of developing type 2 diabetes and other chronic disease, and hopefully also to have a little fun. Tonight, our expert speaker will be focused on nutrition. Next month, the focus will be on physical activity, and in January, the focus will be on emotional well-being. 3 factors that are super important in preventing type 2 diabetes and living well. I would now like to introduce our expert speaker, Jane Eyre Schuster. Jane is a registered dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, a lifestyle coach for the National Diabetes Prevention Program, and the supervisor of Legacy Diabetes and Nutrition Services. She has a wealth of experience in nutrition and helping people improve their health through education, compassion, and support. In her free time, she enjoys hiking, fishing, writing, kayaking, road trips, painting, her dogs, and spending time with her friends and family. Without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Jane.
Thank you, Emily. Welcome, everybody. We are so excited that you're here. I'm going to make a concerted effort to speak into the camera, and you will probably see me looking down quite a bit just to see where my slides are. But I am very used to doing these in person, and so I tend to walk around and have a lot of eye contact. So this is new for me too. Next slide, please. So the question I get all the time is what prediabetes or what is prediabetes? So prediabetes is when your blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but are not yet high enough to be diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. And there will be further education or information available to you with more specific guidelines. Next slide, please. So tonight's to-do list is just talk about basic principles of healthy eating and describe a few ways that you can prevent or delay type 2 diabetes with some nutrition intervention. I started out with this slide that has some nutrition quotes that sort of speak to food as medicine. The food that you eat can either be the safest and the most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. That's from Anne Wigmore. You don't have to cook fancy or complicated masterpieces, just good food from fresh ingredients. From Julia Child, and I'm going to assume you all know who Julia Child is. Good nutrition will prevent 95% of all diseases. This comes from Linus Pauling. And finally from Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Next slide, please. So in my profession, I definitely spend a lot of time talking about nutrition side of illnesses. But personally, as well as professionally, what I have experienced over the years is that health isn't just about nutrition. It really is a three-legged stool. We can't talk about food without talking about movement and stress and emotional responses. And so that's one of the reasons why we have put this program together the way it is, because all three of these pieces are equally important when it comes to making behavior changes so that we can live healthier and overall prevent type 2 diabetes. Next screen, please. So the National Diabetes Prevention Program, I'll just read this. It's a structured evidence-based lifestyle change program to avoid or to delay the development of type 2 diabetes by up to 58%. And for those who are over 65, it can actually decrease your risk for up to 71%. To me, that is amazing. Now, if you have prediabetes, if you don't have diabetes, if you do have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, what the program really looks at, the main objectives, is to help people lose 5% of the weight that you weigh tonight sitting in the chair that you are sitting in. You lose 5% of what you weigh today. And you work on a goal of getting 150 minutes of moderate physical activity a week, and you too can decrease your risk for developing type 2 diabetes by 58%. So as an example, if a person weighs 200 pounds, 10-pound weight loss would be 20 pounds. 5% is 10. I just think that for someone like myself who has battled my weight my whole life, to have somebody to tell me that all I have to do right now is to lose 5% of what I weigh today, I can do that. It gives me hope, and I've seen it give others hope as well. I've run several of these programs now, and it is just mind-boggling how I see shoulders relax and people feel like they can do this. Next slide, please. I will mention that, and Tony Wolf, who is our physical therapist, who will be doing our next presentation in December, will cover this as well. But just as a cheat, You do not have to do the 30 minutes 5 days a week all at once. You can divvy it up into 10 minutes. So for those of us that may not be out there doing a lot of physical activity right now, even just starting with 10 minutes can make a huge difference. So as you all probably know, personally, and as I know personally and professionally, there are hundreds of different diets out there, some dating back way, way back, and some that are brand new. But diets, the verb to diet, isn't always the best way. Most of us, those of us that have dieted, have found that we're incredibly successful initially, but then unfortunately we tend to gain the weight back. And if you're like me, you get interest. So why are we not going to be discussing specific diets this evening? First of all, diets are pretty short term. You've got 3 months, you've got 6 months, you've got 30 days, you've got 45 days. So they don't really allow a lot of time to make habit changing or habit forming changes. So we've all heard that you need 21 days to make a habit change. Well, some of us may take a little longer than that. The other problem is that most of them are unsustainable over a long period of time, not because people are unable to, but we're actually cutting out groups of foods. And a lot of these foods people really enjoy. So we talk more in terms of what can we do to get healthy without necessarily getting caught up on and off diets. I already addressed the eliminating the groups of foods, and it's interesting, there's only 3 calorie producing nutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And since I started, I've seen diets coming in covering all 3 of them. They typically are not nutritionally sound. Many diets, you are required to take fiber supplements, or are recommended that you take vitamins and mineral supplements, because when we cut out groups of foods, we tend to lose our nutrition. Some restrict exercise because the calories are inadequate. The other thing that I know a lot of us that diet don't necessarily want to hear, but behavior change is really what fuels this train. And if we don't allow ourselves to make small, reasonable changes over a longer period of time, we're just addressing the weight. And the other thing that I have also learned personally over the years is that assuming that weight loss, if we get the weight off, we'll be happier. Now, we will feel better. We might feel better about ourselves, but overall, the weight loss itself is just part of the solution. It's not the entire solution. Next slide, please. So we have to talk about the importance of food. Obviously, we use food for all sorts of things. We use it for traditions and celebrations. It's used as rewards and punishment. If you don't finish your dinner, you don't get dessert, or learning how to cultivate the foods, or cooking, or eating. We all come from very varied backgrounds with lots of traditions seeped in food. Healthy eating is for everybody. It's not just for people to prevent type 2 diabetes. So those of you that are on the call this evening, if you're just listening in to get nutrition, this is for you as well. For those of you that are watching and you may already be living with type 2 diabetes, this is for you too. So consider how to increase the foods that contain, I love this, that contain the elements of human life. One of our other dietitians came up with that, and I just thought that's a great way of describing the foods that we eat and how it actually works with the body. So we have our carbohydrates, our proteins, our fats, our vitamins and minerals, and water. Next slide, please. Nutrition. Now, we've all heard, and it is true, that plant-based diets have been shown to reduce type 2 diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, and other chronic illnesses. This does not mean that you have to become vegan, all right? It's just stating that the plant the plant-based diets provide us with a lot of those things that we need to fight illness. More plants include fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Eating a rainbow, I love that. I love this picture because it's a great indication of what our diet can really look like. Whole grains, fruits, and vegetables also provide us with a lot of fiber. And fiber is very important for all sorts of things. And as nutrition research goes on, we're finding out how indeed important fiber really is. Less animal products. So we definitely need protein, but we really, really want to try to focus more on the plant-based. Generally, Americans eat plenty of protein. So what we talk about is increasing our plant intake and decreasing our animal intake. And then, as we all know, eating less refined and processed foods. They just add calories, sugar, salt, and fat. And unfortunately, as much as we'd like to think a cupcake should be nutritionally valuable, it is not. Next screen, please. So carbohydrates, which tend to be, as many people think, the devil's spawn. You know, I do say to a lot of my clients that if cutting carbs out cured diabetes, I wouldn't have a job. I also live with someone who's had diabetes since he was 12. If that were the cure, I'd be all over it. But the human body needs carbohydrates. It's an important form of energy for the muscles and for the brain. The main foods that contain carbohydrates are our fruits, vegetables, specifically starchy vegetables, our whole grains, beans, legumes, milk and yogurts, and then our splurges. The largest source of fiber comes from the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the legumes, the dried beans. Fiber is incredibly important. Fiber does 4 things. One is that we have to chew it in order to swallow it safely. So we tend to eat less. It's going to make its way to the stomach and the intestinal tract where it's going to be worked on for a while so that the body can extract what it needs. So we tend to feel full longer. The third reason is that a lot of the fiber that we consume in our fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes do not convert to glucose. So we actually get a much lower glucose rise, and it rises much more slowly. And 4, because it's poop. And yes, I'm using the word. Now, what happens past that point in the large intestine, you are starting to hear more and more about the gut microbiome. That we will not be talking about this evening. Fiber also helps lower cholesterol levels. Next fiber, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so the proteins, plants versus animal. A lot of people believe that if they follow a plant-based diet, they don't get enough protein, and it's very difficult not to get enough protein. So the plant-based proteins include the legumes, the lentils, the split peas, the garbanzo beans, tofu, soy milk, edamame, tempeh, quinoa, brewer's yeast or nutritional yeast, our nuts and seeds and their butters. The animal-based, choosing the leanest most often, which I know you all know, is chicken without the skin, right? Turkey and fish, egg whites. And then the ones that are a little bit higher in our saturated fats are the beefs, the pork, the egg, and dairy products. Next slide, please. Fat is very important. I grew up on a low-fat diet. And I think a lot of people I know grew up on a low-fat diet. And what we have found over the years is that fat is incredibly important. Yes, it's very calorically dense, but it's also incredibly important for the body. It's a necessary vitamin or necessary to use our fat-soluble vitamins. Most people, if you're in Oregon, well, or anywhere for that matter, we're being encouraged to take more vitamin D. And in order to use our vitamin D, we need to have fat in the diet. Plant-based, which are the more heart healthy, the avocados, the vegetable oils, the nuts, the seeds, their butters, olives, peanuts, those kinds of things. We also have our animal-based fat, which is the fat that we find on our ribeye steaks and the chicken skins, and our whole milk products. So we need them for key nutrients, and they're important just like the fats and the proteins. I'm sorry, the carbohydrates and the proteins. Next slide, please. So I love this picture. We've all heard about the choose my plate, the food template, the plate template, the food plate. So really, this is, if you don't do any other nutritionally relevant changes, if you can make your plate look like this, you are well ahead of the game. You've got a quarter of the plate with some kind of protein, a quarter of the plate with some type of whole grain starch, and it could be winter squash, or it could be brown rice, or it could be quinoa, or it could be farro, or it could be corn tortillas. And then you fill the rest of the plate with your fruits and your vegetables. And I don't know about you, but this plate looks phenomenally delicious. And the other, and I'll talk about this later, but sometimes if you use a smaller plate, it looks like it's more food and you get to finish your plate instead of feeling like you have to leave food on your plate when we use the big ones. All right, so let's go to the next slide, please. So some take-home messages. We want to try to eat a rainbow. And we are really blessed in this part of the country. We have a lot of agriculture, a lot of farmers, and we have a plethora of fruits and vegetables to choose from. So when you go to the store, choose something that you haven't had in a while. Try to eat something every 4 to 5 hours. The thing is that if we tend to skip meals, we tend to overeat at the next meal. And that's when we're looking for a lot of carbohydrate because the body's looking for quick acting energy. Choosing water as your main beverage. Try not to drink your meals. I know that there's a lot of smoothies out there, and I'm not saying don't do that. But some of those smoothies can be very high in a lot of fruit and maybe not enough protein. So, mix your foods up. Just don't make your main meals something that you're drinking. Eat foods that are high in fiber because you're going to get all those benefits of the fiber. Select plant-based foods more often. Again, if you go back and look at the plate on the slide before, so about 85% of that plate is plant-based. Thanks. Go back, please. Use smaller plates and silverware. People, you cannot imagine how helpful this is. It really makes a difference. And for those of you that have done it, you know what I'm talking about. Use your salad forks instead of your dinner forks. And it's a great way, even if that's all you do tonight, it's a home run because that is one way that you're going to be able to be more successful with your nutrition. Use the plate method. You can keep that picture, make a copy of it, put it on your refrigerator or laminate it and make it your placemat. Track your food for a week. Sometimes it helps to know what we're doing so that we can discover things and then decide if we want to change them. Most of the time, we're pretty vague about what we eat. So when we start writing it down, we become conscious. And when we're conscious, we get the opportunity to make a different choice. So if I don't eat that chocolate right now, I'm going to die. That's not a true statement, but we'll eat the chocolate, right? So put a pause between that thought and that action. Well, yes, I'm not going to die if I eat the chocolate, but I could have the chocolate after dinner. So it's not about what you can't eat. It's about giving yourself an opportunity to make a different choice, not a good or bad. And then getting a help from a nutrition expert. There are lots of us out there. There are nutritionists and there are dietitians and there are dietitian nutritionists. And we are educated to help you make individual choices. Your meal plan is not going to be the same as the person sitting next to you or your neighbor down the street, right? You might also, both of you have pre-diabetes, but the things that you're going to do for your nutrition may be completely different. So by all means, reach out. We love what we do and we are happy to help. Next slide, please. This is information if you want to know more about the diabetes prevention program, if you want to know more about a program in your area, or if you just want to know more information. And we at Legacy do have a national diabetes prevention program. I am one of the health coaches. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. So I am finished. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I'll look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Jane. Before we begin the cooking segment, I'd like to remind everyone to continue to submit questions in the Q&A. We'll be writing responses to questions during the cooking demo, and Jane will answer some of the most popular questions after the segment. Don't forget to give a thumbs up in the Q&A for questions you like the most. Now, I know some people worry about being able to cook plant-based meals that taste good. Maybe it's too hard or too complicated. I know I definitely fall into that camp. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be complicated. Sam Maggi, the chef from Basics Food Kitchen, is here to show us how to make a couple of different plant-based recipes to get you started. And another thing I forgot to mention earlier is that we're lucky to have Sam for each of our webinars that we have in December and January as well. So now I'd like to introduce Sam Maggi. Growing up around large gardens and small farms, Sam explores world cuisines through inspired use of homegrown produce. His ongoing involvement in a local community garden has fostered a keen appreciation for the Northwest bounty, and he appreciates the relationships he's forged with his fellow gardeners while wrestling tomato cages, swapping recipes, and sharing successful growing techniques. Formerly a chef at Oregon Health and Sciences University, his menus emphasize good health and nutrition through food. Sam believes that fresh food always tastes better, and knowing where the ingredients are sourced adds value. Welcome, Sam.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Jane, for that very inspiring talk. Tonight, I'm going to be showing two dishes. These are plant-based dishes, which are nourishing and easy to prepare. They're quite delicious, and they're also very colorful and good fits for a holiday menu. And also, these are just great fall dishes. We're going to be utilizing some fall ingredients. Brussels sprouts are available now, as well as winter squash. So we're making a West African Brussels sprouts and a roasted winter squash with walnuts and sage. Both of these dishes are heart healthy, as well as gluten-free and vegan. And they're quite simple to prepare. So I hope that everyone will be able to try these out. And I'm going to get right to it because they are quick, and we'll see how quick they are. So we're going to start with the West African Brussels sprouts. This recipe is gauged for 6 servings, and you'll notice we're using a half an onion, a half a bell pepper, and a half a can of stewed tomatoes. But you could easily double this recipe and use the whole onion and the whole pepper. And because this is good, healthy vegetables, there's no trouble in doubling the recipe and feeding more people or having leftovers. So we're going to go ahead and we're starting with heating a pot on, I have a little burner here. And you want, for this Brussels sprout recipe, you want something with some sort of sides, because this is a braised recipe, and braising is simply cooking the vegetable, in this case, in a liquid. And the liquid we'll be using is tomato and some water. So I have the pan heating here over medium heat, and I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil, and that's just enough to coat the bottom of the pan. So as the olive oil is heating, I'm going to go ahead and get my half an onion. So to cut an onion, I like to take off well, it's actually the top end, and then cut through the root end. And you just go ahead and cut right down the middle. And then this makes it very easy to peel and to and to slice. And we're going to be doing some julienne or some thin slicing here. But by leaving this root end on, it holds your onion together. So especially for dicing, and maybe I'll do a dice just to show that as well on the other half. But for slicing, we're just going to go straight down and then follow the curve of the onion. And you want to just follow those natural lines on the onion, and it will come apart quite easily, as you can see. And then you just cut off that root end, and there you have your julienne is all ready to go. And so I'm going to put that into my nice hot oil. Now, if I were dicing this, I would do the same thing, and I just want to demonstrate how easy it can be to dice an onion as well with this method. Again, because the onion is being held together by that root end, you can safely and easily get a really nice dice. All right, so the onion is sauteing a bit. And while that is happening, we're going to go ahead and prepare the pepper. So I have this beautiful red bell pepper. This dish has a lot of nice color, and so you are definitely in the eating the rainbow realm here. So for a pepper, I like to go off both ends, and then often you'll just get this nice clean pepper pieces that you can utilize in your dish, and then you're using all of the vegetable, which is great. And again, we're only using half of the pepper. And so we're going to go ahead and just trim it out, get the seeds out. And this is kind of neat because that just pops right out. And then you have, from here, you can do julienne, or you could, and then you can go to dice or whatever kind of shape you need. So we're going to use half the pepper, and I'm just going to do some julienne strips, which simply means thin slice. And we're going to go ahead and pop that in the pot. And I'm going to use my ends too, just to utilize it. Then we have half left there. And then we have our garlic. So with garlic, a kind of a neat trick is to soak it in a little bit of warm water. And this helps the skin come off very easily, and you don't get all that stickiness. See, you know how garlic skin sometimes will stick to your fingers and so forth. So that water really helps if you even just put it in for a couple seconds, and it helps a bit. But a few minutes is best. And the garlic we're just going to mince up. So just kind of a nice chop. So this dish, it's a Brussels sprout dish. It's a little bit unusual in that it's a braise, and it's going to be using some curry flavor profile. It's still very complementary to a traditional holiday meal. It goes nicely with all that stuff you might have on your table, but also it's just a wonderful dish as of itself. All right, so we have that stuff sauteing, and now we'll get to our star here, the Brussels sprouts. And this time of year, or in a little later, we'll start to see the stalks of Brussels sprouts in the stores, and those are always a lot of fun to just grab a whole stalk and pop these guys off, and you use them throughout a few days or so. But you can also buy them individually, of course, and they just need a little bit of a cleanup. So we're going to go ahead and take the ends off, and you can use a paring knife for this also if it's more comfortable. And then just take some of those outer leaves off. And for this dish, we're using the whole sprout. We're not going to cut them. And we have some pretty nice little petite guys here, so they'll cook up pretty quickly. We'll pop those in. And we're just going to saute everything together. And now I'm going to go ahead and add my my spices and my seasoning. I've got some salt, some pepper, some turmeric, and curry powder. And there's just add a little bit of residual oil I'm throwing in there. And we're going to coat all the Brussels sprouts. And then go ahead and add our liquids. This is the half a can of diced tomato and 1 cup of water. All right, and now we just let this simmer, and it should be done in about 15 to 20 minutes. If you like a softer texture in your Brussels sprout, go ahead and let it cook a little bit longer. And we have a finished product here, the magic of television. And here it is, all nice, tender, and delicious Brussels sprouts. And that braising method really infuses those flavors into your dish. All right, so our second dish is one of my favorite sort of side dishes. I go to this over and over again, and it is the winter squash with walnuts and sage. I have a giant sage plant in front of my house. They grow, I'm in Oregon, and they grow prolifically here. And so I just can go out in my yard and pick sage leaves whenever I like. And the sage leaf is like that. But let's look at the butternut first. So you can use any sort of winter squash for this. Butternut squash are nice because they're available year round, really. And cutting a squash is one of the things students ask us about quite often, the hard winter squash. And you can see you just want to keep a really even pressure on your blade. Go through, don't rush it, and just have a steady pressure, and you can get through most squash that way. And then to peel a butternut, it has a really nice thin skin, so it's easy to use a peeler, or you can use your knife and peel it like so. And then you notice I cut it right above the bulge, whoops, and so that's where the seeds are in here. And so seeds are like this, and to get the seeds out, you just take a spoon, pop them out, and then you can peel and dice. And I'm just going to do a quick little dice. So with any vegetable, you always want to create flat surfaces, and so you're always working off of that wide, flat base for safety. And then use the claw. We call this the claw when you're chopping vegetables. Keep your fingers out of the way. Okay, and I have some pre-diced. Let's add that there. And then I'm going to go ahead and toss the squash with a little bit of olive oil, salt and pepper. Give that a good tossing. All right, and then I have a baking sheet here. A little bit of olive oil down on this just to help prevent sticking. You could also use parchment paper. Throw it down. And then we're going to go ahead and put this in a preheated oven. I think, there we go. And again, magic of television, it's done. And I'm going to go ahead and throw this into a bowl. Okay, and then we have our sage leaves. And I'm just going to toast some walnuts really quickly. A good way to toast nuts is in a dry skillet. You don't need to add any oil or anything like that. And just sort of on medium heat and move them around a little bit. And as soon as you kind of smell them, that nice nutty aroma, then you're ready. Get that out of the way a little bit. All right, so sage leaves, these are some nice big ones. And so I'm just going to kind of do again, like a chiffonade on this, I guess. So you kind of roll them and then cut across in thin strips. And then you have a chiffonade. And just so they're more evenly distributed, I'll cut them across a couple times. And then we just put that over the top. And then our nuts. Give those a little chop. And these also just tossed over the top. And then you can work them in a little bit. And that's that dish. The butternut squash with sage and walnuts. And you can substitute different nuts and different herbs, you know, experiment, different squash. But what I really wanted to show you tonight were those techniques and how quickly these fresh ingredients can go together for a really delicious and healthful part of your meal. Yeah, thank you very much for checking it out.
Thank you, Sam. And thanks to all our participants for the great questions that have been entered. We'd like to take a few minutes now to focus on the most popular ones, and we'll do our best to get through all of them. But for any questions that we don't get to, we'll include some responses in our follow-up email. So we're going to bring Jane back, I believe, to jump in and answer some questions, and then Sam will stick with us as well. So Jane, looks like we're getting a fair amount of votes for the questions around intermittent fasting. So you'd mentioned eating every 4 to 5 hours. So the questions are really around what about intermittent fasting, and does it support or help diabetes, type 2 diabetes in particular?
Yeah, that's a very popular fast right now, or diet, I should say. And there's nothing wrong with intermittent fasting. It's not something that I can say everybody can do. As a dietitian, it's my responsibility to give specific recommendations to people that are with me, in front of me, and I know their history. But in essence, when I'm talking about eating something every 4 to 5 hours, you can do that while you're intermittent fasting as well. It's really just about making sure that you don't get too hungry. And it also helps stabilize blood sugars a little bit more than if you just don't eat for long periods of time. So it's not necessarily against the intermittent fasting. It's just about making sure that you're eating frequently enough so that you don't get over hungry.
Thank you, Jane. Looks like we also have a lot of questions around what is the right amount of carbohydrates to eat. So people talking about counting carbs and limiting carbs. And so I think they're looking for some general guidelines on daily carbohydrate intake or per meal carbohydrate intake. Any thoughts there?
Lots of thoughts, but let's answer the question. So again, this is going to depend on each and every one of you. Every one of you is a little bit different. And it depends on what you're doing right now and what you would like to be doing. So a good rule of thumb, if you're looking for some direction, and this is usually based on the American Diabetes Association, is that women keep to about 30 to 45 grams of carbohydrate per meal, men 45 to 60. So when we look at carbohydrates, we look at carb choices. For instance, one slice of bread is a carb choice. A small apple is a carb choice. 1 cup of milk is a carb choice. And each of those carb choices is equivalent to 15 grams of carbohydrate. So that's kind of what the recommendations are, just very generally. And again, when you're choosing your carbohydrates, think fiber. Fiber should be like your favorite F word. So I always like to say it's my second F word, favorite F word, but it is equally important. So the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, and yes, of course, you can splurge and have ice cream and ice, and cake and those kinds of things. That all counts and can be worked into a healthy meal plan.
So a follow-up question, and maybe a clarifying point from you, Jane, is that a participant asking that they've been told to follow a low-carb lifestyle for a person who has diabetes. So they're a little bit surprised to hear that a plant-based diet is better. Have they misunderstood, or could you clarify the difference?
Well, low carb means different things to different people. And that again is a question that would be better answered specifically with the person if I had more of a background and the reasoning. For someone who lives with diabetes, type 2, type 1, carbohydrate needs greatly vary. So the question that I was answering was more about just basic general nutrition. Everybody wants the secret, believe me, and there isn't a secret. It's just about meeting and learning what works best for you, and I can actually, or a dietitian can help you decide what number is going to work best for you. And a plant-based diet, keep in mind that a lot of these carbohydrates that we're discussing in a plant-based diet are loaded with fiber, and fiber makes the carbohydrate digestion very different than if we're eating a lot of foods that are refined and processed and high in fat and high in calories and high in salt and high in sugar. So they can work together very nicely.
Thanks, Jane. So we've had a number of questions on specifics about cooking, and I want to just tell everyone on participating with us today that we will send out the recipes. So the questions of how long to cook things or what temperature to put them at, those will come in a follow-up email to you, and the recipes that Sam did for us will be shown. Sam, if you can jump in, we did have a question as to what you would suggest pairing with the dishes you made as far as a protein, or what would you add to round out the meal? We may have lost Sam.
Hi. Hello. Hi.
Hi. So we were just looking, we were looking for some suggestions of what you might add to the things you've cooked tonight to round out a whole meal, maybe some protein suggestions or some things you might even include from the carbohydrate groups.
Oh yeah, well, any sort, I mean, like we're looking at a lot of fish options. So a nice, a nice piece, a nice fillet of fish would well with either of these dishes. With the Brussels sprouts, you'd really, you want, as far as a carbohydrate goes, something that will kind of absorb some of this beautiful sauce, the braising liquid. So, some rice, some couscous, something like that. And those would be some suggestions. As far as the butternut squash goes, any like a nice grilled piece of tofu or tempeh would be very good. And the butternut squash is sort of, it's a vegetable and a carbohydrate, so it would fit the bill. It would be a nice complement.
Sam, I don't know if you can hear me, but the other thing that I think it would really work well as is you could almost use it as a stuffing.
Yeah,
It has a lot of that sort of stuffing feeling with the sage and I don't know, it's just, it might be a great option if somebody was having turkey or chicken or something and they wanted to.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I think that could work very well. If you were using it as a stuffing, you might want to par roast it a little bit. Just maybe cook it halfway through and then put it into your stuff into your piece of chicken or what have you, and finish it. Or even better yet, wait, cook them separately and then put them together, which is safer.
Yes, absolutely. Food
Yeah.
safety first.
Yes.
So Sam, I'll stick with you for the next question, and that's, is nutritional yeast the same yeast I use for making bread? I really can't say that word.
Oh, well, that's a good one. No, nutritional yeast is it's sometimes called brewer's yeast, and it's actually what was skimmed off. Originally, I believe it was what was skimmed off of like brewing beer, and then it's dried, and it has a lot of B vitamins and things like that. You can't activate bread with it. It's not an active yeast. So active dry yeast is what we use for making bread and things like that. Whereas brewer's yeast, it's full of vitamins and so forth, but it's a different animal.
Okay, we've had several questions just asking about displaying different slides again or sharing the information. So we'll be sure that you all get the information that you had presented tonight in a follow-up email. Jane, I'm going to come back to you. We have a question related to supplements, particularly containing apple cider vinegar. And is that at all beneficial in lowering A1C?
Well, nutritionally speaking, apple cider vinegar has been shown to help with blood glucose metabolism. Done by itself, no, it's not going to have a direct impact, I should say, on an A1C. But it's certainly something that you can include, if you're making salad dressings or you want to sprinkle it on vegetables. I know some people take capsules, some people just mix it in water. It's certainly not going to hurt anything. There are lots of things that help improve glucose metabolism, but it's not just one thing that works. So by all means, include it into your diet instead of like buying the already made dressings. Make your own. There's some wonderful recipes, and I'm sure that Basics Market also has those kinds of things. And sprinkling cinnamon on your oatmeal and getting a little bit of walking in and eating berries. I mean, I wish that there was a magic bullet, but there isn't. So it's just about really trying to do the best you can 80% of the time and then enjoying yourself the rest. Not that taking care of yourself should be a problem, but you can splurge and still be healthy.
So we had a lot of thumbs up for a question around pre or probiotics and do they help prevent diabetes? And our own Laura Schaefer jumped in and said, the fiber-rich plant foods act as prebiotics and cultured and fermented foods such as yogurt provide probiotics. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Jane?
No, I that's exactly what they are. Is it shown to fend off diabetes? No, these products that we're starting to hear more and more about are just a very, very small piece of an incredibly large puzzle. And there isn't anything on the market today that is going to be able to do the things that these things are going to be able to do at some point. There are billions and billions and billions of cultures out there that are shown to help with our gut microbiome, which is further down in the intestinal tract, and that those gut flora really have a huge impact on moods and on health and obesity. And I mean, we're in such a baby state with this right now, but there's lots and lots of research going on, and pro and prebiotics are part of that. But right, the hope is that someday we'll be able to have these things designed specifically for us, not just as humans, but for Jane and for Sam and for Kelly. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. So again, a lot of the foods that Laura just mentioned, those are all great foods to incorporate into a healthy eating plan.
Thanks, Jane. We're switching gears a little bit with our next question. What about all the plant-based meat substitutes? Are they a good alternative to animal-based protein? And maybe once you've answered, if Sam has any suggestions on using those in cooking, that would be great.
All right, well, just like any of the foods that we have at our disposal in the grocery stores, some of them are relatively as I refer to, man-messed with, and then there are others that are more man-messed with. And a lot of times what happens is we demand a certain product, and so the manufacturers oblige, but we expect it to taste a certain way or to look a certain way. And so there's a lot more processing that goes into some of these products, just like everything else. And I did notice a question that was being asked about phytoestrogens in the tofu products. And really, the less man-messed with, when you're dealing with whole soy, you're in a far better arena than if you're looking at foods that have been really processed down to create something that makes it more, I don't know, pleasing. So I think that when we talk about the soy products, it's really about looking for something that is that you can look at the ingredients and you know what it is, and it's not highly processed. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but maybe Sam can answer a little bit more.
Yeah, well, one thing that comes to mind with this whole program and with some things you've mentioned is the idea of whole foods, right? And so we're looking at a whole foods diet or things that, like these dishes we made this evening, things that you're manufacturing it yourself. It only has a few simple ingredients and you know exactly where they came from. And I think as humans, our bodies are best adapted to this sort of food. So anytime, there is a lot of stuff on the market now where foods are trying to imitate meats and things like that. And I would tend to stay away from those just because there's going to be all kinds of emulsifiers and flavorings and things like that. I actually have worked in a tofu factory, and it is a process, but it's a pretty simple process where you're making tofu curds out of soy milk using salt water, and that's all tofu is. But tempeh is even a better option because it's the whole soybean which has been fermented, and you're getting we're talking about probiotics, and you're getting some of these enzymes and things, and tempeh actually has B vitamins, which tofu does not. And as far as preparations, if you're using something like a tofu or tempeh, I just like to marinate it in a marinade with whatever marinade you prefer, and I cut it thin, marinate it, and then or cube it small and put it on a sheet pan like we did with this butternut squash, and just roast it, and then you can add it on into a lot of different dishes, and it's really versatile that way. Otherwise, as far as building things, using like beans are a really great source of whole food protein. And there's just a universe of beans and legumes, pulses that you can manipulate yourself in ways, add flavorings, add different grains, make burgers, make balls, all sorts of fun stuff, and get a lot of flavor and a lot of that kind of meaty satisfaction that we crave. Those are some things I like.
Yeah, and I think that there are products out there that textured vegetable proteins, and there are some products that are on the market that are good options. And they, tofu, soy, beans, like Sam said, legumes, pulses, they're all wonderful sources of plant-based proteins.
Thank you, Jane and Sam. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we had so many wonderful questions that we weren't able to get to all of them tonight, but we will be sure to answer as many as we can in the follow-up email. So please look for that after we're done. I'm going to turn it back to Emily. Thank you.
Hi, thanks Sam, and thanks Jane for great presentations, and thanks to everyone for submitting such great questions. We really hope you enjoyed tonight's event and that you could take home a new skill or a couple of ideas to apply in your own life. We're also really excited to invite you to attend 2 more seminars. We have one on December 8th from 6 to 7 by Tony Wolf, a physical therapist at Legacy Health, or actually Legacy Weight and Diabetes Institute, sorry. He's going to discuss the role of physical activity in having and maintaining good health and how moving enhances overall quality of life. And then on January the 12th from 6 to 7 p.m., we'll have Dr. Asani Sewell, a clinical psychologist, and Ladera Perez-Lin, a clinical psychology doctoral student, who will join us from Legacy Weight and Diabetes Institute to share practical tips and strategies for creating a life with less stress and more balance, and the power of learning to forgive. And again, for both of these sessions, Sam Maggi from Basics Food Kitchen will join us with new recipes to incorporate food as medicine into your wellness lifestyle. Finally, we're going to have a brief survey that will launch on your screen when we end this webinar. Please consider completing this to provide feedback on the event tonight, but also to let us know and give us input on any future services, webinars, topics that you would like to hear from Legacy Health and how we can best support your wellness. The webinar recording will be posted on the Legacy Diabetes Prevention website and Basics Market YouTube channel. The link will be sent via email along with a free Legacy Health and Basics Market recipe booklet and a coupon for Basics Market as a thank you. If you've not yet registered for the other 2 events in the series, the registration link should be available in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you again in December. Take care.